illegal blockade protesters flex their might, looking a lot more like terrorists than anything else, and Justin Trudeau doesn't really seem to care. Plus, we'll talk about the fallout of the cancelled Teck Frontier Mine project and This Week in Fake News. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the program. We are doing a live edition of the Candice Malcolm Show. If you tuned in on Monday, you would have seen that we had some technical issues on the show. The Wi-Fi sort of cut out halfway through. So unfortunately for folks watching on Facebook, they didn't get to see the whole program, but it was on Periscope for the most part, what we could salvage. So let's get to it. Well, first, I just want to say, watched the Democrat debate last night, and, you know, it was probably the best Democrat debate so far because people actually went after Bernie Sanders, and man, that guy is terrible. Like, I thought that he performed very poorly last night. I totally understand his populist appeal and all that kind of stuff. His policies are awful, but the moment where he was actually doubling down and tripling down on defending the Castros and defending communists, you should ask Justin Trudeau how that turned out. When Justin Trudeau wrote a sort of glowing love letter to Fidel Castro after he died, that was like one of the most embarrassing moments for the Prime Minister, and that's saying something because Justin Trudeau is always embarrassing himself. But anyways, hearing someone who wants to be the leader of the free world and the leader of the United States of America, which is greatest force for prosperity and freedom in the world, hearing someone who wants to lead that country praising a socialist dictator and glossing over the horrible atrocities that happened was just pretty despicable. So hopefully Democrats come to their senses and get rid of Bernie Sanders, or don't elect him as their leader, because I think that would be a disaster for everyone. Okay, let's get to the Canadian news today, because, well, we were told that things were supposed to be going back to normal, that the court injunction was going to be issued, and that the protesters were going to be moved away. But as we saw today, that just simply didn't happen. And I'm telling you, these protesters are looking a lot more like domestic terrorists than anything else. So the main protesters that were blocking the line in Belleville at the Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, they moved off the tracks. Well, sort of. There were protesters seen sort of blocking the railway and then jumping off at the last minute. But the train was successfully able to go through for the first time in a few weeks. But then, of course, other protests popped up. So they decided to go after commuters in the greater Toronto area. Really, really not a good way to win any kind of public support. I mean, it seems at this point that they're really just trying to galvanize the country against them. They recognize that most Canadians want the court injunction followed. They want the protesters removed. They want them arrested, all this kind of stuff. The few people who actually support the protesters, after you go after someone's morning commute, that's like the last straw. No one's going to support these protesters after this. So they pull another stunt. They show up at the GO train station in Hamilton and basically just block traffic. What a nightmare for anyone trying to commute in and around Toronto. And then the footage that we saw today was just absolutely remarkable. So we had protesters basically, again, throwing a temper tantrum and really, 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 what I think, crossing the line when it comes to what I would describe as domestic terrorism. I mean, if you've seen the footage, go onto Twitter, look at the footage, and you will see that they were throwing... They were setting fire. There are fires all over the railroad tracks. There's footage of these individuals throwing wooden crates, wooden pallets at a moving train. And this train is moving like heavy materials. I mean, it looks like part of the train is actually moving oil, petrol, and you have people lighting fires with tires and throwing them at the train, throwing them under the tracks. I mean, I don't know in what world this wouldn't be considered domestic terrorism. I mean, this is attempted murder in my books, and it's absolutely crazy to watch these radicals trying to derail a moving CN train. Not only is it incredibly dangerous for these idiotic protesters, but imagine, you don't know what the fallout could be. The driver, they put the driver's life in danger. And if that train were to derail, where would it go? It would go into a neighboring community. It could go into a subdivision. It could go into a mall. Like, it's just incredibly, incredibly dangerous what these protesters are doing. And again, it looks a lot more like terrorism to me than anything else. Our prime minister is addressing the situation. And let me just tell you, Justin Trudeau, forget about his ideology, forget about the fact that he allowed this to go on for way too long. When you just look at the approach, it just doesn't seem like he cares. It doesn't seem like his heart is in it at all. He just seems sort of resigned to the fact that this is happening. And the Trudeau Liberals have created a huge, huge problem for themselves, because the dichotomy that they've created, this is the media version of the story that the Trudeau Liberals have sort of bought up and promoted as well, is that this is a First Nations protest against a oil and gas project. Well, that's not true. I mean, if you watch my show, if you watch this program, if you sort of look for the other side of the story, you'll recognize that so many First Nations community support these pipelines. They want the jobs. They want natural resource development. They want the economic opportunities. Of course, all 20 elected bands along the route of this Coastal GasLink project were in favor of it. So to paint this as a reconciliation issue and to paint it as like First Nations protest is just wrong. It's wrong. But that's what the Liberals have done, and that's what the media have done. And now Trudeau's backed himself into a corner, because he's supposed to be the Prime Minister of reconciliation. He's supposed to be the Prime Minister of healing, of kumbaya, holding hands and talking about our feelings and getting past sort of the decades or the centuries of misunderstandings and mistreatment towards First Nations communities. So he's the Prime Minister that's supposed to do that. And yet, because he framed this issue as First Nations versus Canadians, he can't take the side of Canadians. He can't take the side of Canadians, even though that's not the actual dichotomy. The dichotomy is like a group of far-left fringe protesters against Canadians. And that the far-left fringe environmental protesters are appropriating First Nations. They're pretending to be First Nations. They're trying to wave the flag of First Nations, even though so many First Nations voices are now speaking out. But because Trudeau has done this, and the media has done this, and the Liberal Party have done this, now they're stuck in a corner because they can't come out and be mean and be seen as cracking down on the First Nations cause. So here we have Justin Trudeau today commenting about the terrorism that's happening in our country today. And he sort of just gives a lackluster response, like meh.
Obviously, we're hoping for a resolution soon. We're continuing to work as we have over the past weeks. It is extremely concerning to see people endangering their own lives and the lives of others by trying to interfere with the trains. But again, we are continuing to work very hard to resolve this quickly.
That was just like low energy Jeb. That was low energy Justin. We're going to work our best, blah, blah, blah. It's extremely concerning to see people endangering their own lives and others. Like Justin Trudeau just doesn't really know what to say. He doesn't really know what kind of stance he can take. So he just kind of comes out low energy and blah. Well, I'm sorry, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it in a country where we've really just empowered the far left. Like, they're flexing their might now. At this point, it's sort of like in your face. We can do whatever we want. We can hold the country hostage with our protest, and you're not going to do anything to stop it. We know you're not going to do anything to stop it. You're not going to send in the military. You're not going to arrest us. You're not going to put an end to this, Justin Trudeau. You're just going to, continue to do your thing. And the far left is going to flex over it. So that's incredibly disappointing to see. And again, it's part of a trend. It's now part of a trend that we see with the far left just completely brazenly being anti-Canadian and anti-resource development. I said we were going to talk about the Teck Resources Limited. We talked about it in the last program, but I know that the connection wasn't very good, so I'm going to go over it a little bit more today for folks who missed the Monday podcast. So news came out that the Teck Frontier Mine was pulling the plug on its project. This was a really exciting project. The prospect of it for people in Alberta, everyone I talked to in Alberta, this was sort of like the light at the end of the tunnel, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise very bleak economy. Very bleak economy. This is like the opportunity that so many people have just been like waiting for, salivating over, and now it's been killed. So Teck Frontier Mine was supposed to employ 7,000 people during its construction phase and another 2,500 people during its expected 40-year lifespan. lifespan. The investment was $20 billion, and it was going to create an estimated $70 billion in tax revenue during its lifetime, the lifetime of this mine. The mine was approved by all 14 First Nations community. They wanted it. The consulting had been done. People were happy about it. But because of the state of our country, because of Justin Trudeau's Canada. But anyways, watching the 3 weeks of absolute chaos and anarchy unfolding in Canada, watching protesters just completely take over the country, shut down the economy, again, hold the entire country hostage. This is domestic terrorism, no other way to put it. Watching that happen, I mean, how can you sit by and say, you know what, I think it's a good idea for my stockholders to invest $20 billion into the country? Well, the CEO of Frontier, the company that was doing tech, he basically said just that. So he was speaking at an investor conference in Florida, and this is a quote from the CEO, Don Lindsay. This is what he said. He said, literally, over the last few days, it has become increasingly clear that there's no constructive path forward, he said. So, he said that Canada has to have a much-needed conversation about balancing the environment with resource development, which is kind of sad. I mean, come on, we should have already had that conversation. That conversation's already been had. We need to strike a balance. We need to be realistic that Canada has less than 2% of global emissions, that Canada is, I won't even go over it all in this podcast because it's been said so many times, but Canada is a responsible steward of the environment, whereby all the other countries that are really the problem when it comes to carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, they don't care. They don't care. They're not following the Paris Accord. They're not tying one hand behind their back. They're going forward and building their coal mines and building their oil and gas sector and doing what's best for their own country. Canada is the exception to that. So more from Don Lindsay, the CEO of Frontier. He says, as a result of these illegal blockades, there has been some deep concern expressed across the country, in particular with relation to the safety of railway employees, to the safety of the public and the protesters, and the effects they're having on the Canadian economy and individual Canadians, he said. So again, I mean, this whole show, the whole protests and blockades, illegal blockades over the Teck Frontier Mine have just been a showcase to all companies in the world, all companies considering investing in Canada or currently investing in Canada, that Canada is not a functioning country, that Canada is not a reliable environment, that there is no rule of law in Canada. We're basically what Joe Oliver said, a banana republic. And it's a sad, sad day for Canada when that's the case, and it is being observed. And so this is just one example, because we know that so many companies have been pulling out of Canada. I mean, Encana it's called Energy Canada. It was the Canadian energy company. They pulled the plug. They left. They moved down to Texas. Kinder Morgan, Houston Oil and Gas, ConocoPhillips, Shell. All these companies have announced that they're leaving Canada, they're leaving Alberta, because they just cannot trust the Canadian government to create a predictable environment for them. And so, I mean, this is honestly really a sad day in Canada, but not all Canadians are sad. They don't all recognize the sort of gravity of the situation, because we had our friends over at the David Suzuki Foundation claim victory. They actually put out a social media post saying, awesome news, Teck has withdrawn its application for the Frontier Oil Sands Mine. Big thanks to each and every one of you who spoke up to say reject Teck. And then there was a banner that says victory. Victory. So imagine killing at least 9,500 jobs, direct jobs. Plus, as the economy works, there's probably thousands of other jobs that are also connected to those initial jobs. So, the investment of $70 billion to the public coffers to pay for social services, to pay for infrastructure, to pay for government. This is what the David Suzuki Foundation is cheering. And not just that, but the lost livelihood. All of those individuals in Alberta who had some hope, who had some economic opportunity on the horizon, who were going to be able to put food on their family's table, because of this job. And this is what the David Suzuki Foundation is celebrating. This is what they're cheering. So pretty despicable stuff over there. But the David Suzuki Foundation is not alone. There is an American organization. It used to be called Forest Ethics. They've changed their name to Stand.Earth. They are hiring a full-time campaigner to stop the LNG projects in British Columbia. LNG is liquefied natural gas. It's a very clean, very green form of petroleum. And yet this is what the US-based company is paying someone a full-time position, going to pay them $70,000 a year, $70,000 to $85,000 a year for this position, and they're advertising this. They're advertising this. So pretty despicable stuff, honestly. The fact that someone in the U.S., so that there's a job posting, senior oil and gas campaigner, Standard Earth is seeking a passionate, experienced campaigner to development and implement strategies to raise awareness to build power to stop the expansion of the oil and gas sector. This is a position in British Columbia. So why is a U.S. company paying someone to organize these illegal blockades in Canada? I mean, this is foreign interference into our democracy, into our country, and we don't have a government that's willing to put an end to it, to actually wake up to what's happening in our country and put a stop to it. So again, this is what's going on. It's hidden in plain sight, plain to see, but we don't have a prime minister that has any kind of courage or any kind of interest in standing up for Canadians, for standing up for workers and people who might have the opportunity to, again, provide for their family through working in the energy sector. It's pretty sad. It's a pretty sad day in Canada. Okay, let's move on. I want to do fake news of the week. So this isn't news, but the CBC did this pretty pathetic little bit, sort of attacking conservatives for threatening to pull funding from the CBC. So this is the problem in Canada. We have this infrastructure where the government pays journalists. So we have all these government-funded journalists who work for the government, some directly, like the CBC, and then others indirectly, like all the media bailouts and all of the different grants that media companies can apply for. And so when it comes to CBC, they directly derive their salaries from the government. And so when a political party ever has the courage to say, hey, you know what, we're not really getting good value for our money, and in a free society, we shouldn't have a government-funded press anyway, as the Conservatives are doing right now, they get attacked by the media machine at the CBC. So it's just this really ridiculous balance of power. And so Erin O'Toole, who's running for leader of the Conservative, has pledged to drastically cut down the budget to the CBC. I've praised him before on this program, on this podcast. And so the CBC is getting afraid, I guess. They're getting upset. And so they put out this ridiculous little comedy bit on 22 Minutes, which is their supposed comedy show. I say supposed because it's just really not funny at all. It's really stupid. But anyway, so here we have this CBC government comedian who is doing a riff on Erin O'Toole. And I mean, it's not comedy at all. It's not funny. It's really just a political attack. It's a political attack. The CBC pulls no punches. They make it so brazenly clear that they hate conservatives and that they're anti-conservative that they don't even really have jokes. They just kind of like rail against them, and then that's the joke. And it's like, okay, you're not a very good pundit, and you're like a terrible comedian. So this is just like has no entertainment value for anyone unless you're just like a diehard CBC fan, which I guess that is the CBC audience. The CBC audience is just people who are diehard fans of the CBC. So I'll play a bit of this. This is just so brutal though. But here we go.
Conservative leadership candidate Erin O'Toole thinks he knows what Canadians want.
An O'Toole government will modernize and reform the CBC. We will end funding for CBC Digital, and we will cut CBC English TV budget by 50%.
Screw you, Erin! Now, if you're watching this, I assume you're either a fan of the CBC or you're stuck in a hospital waiting room. So thanks for watching, and I hope it's not infected. Erin wants to get rid of the CBC, but why?
The world of broadcast media has changed dramatically, but our public broadcaster is stuck in the past.
Oh, look, a guy who won't march in pride parades is saying the CBC is out of touch.
Okay, that's like a low blow. That's a stupid cheap shot because we know that Erin O'Toole said that he won't march in the pride parades because of the way that they exclude the police. So he actually said that he would march in pride parades, just not the Toronto one, because of the way that they exclude police. So really just lying, like just lying to make a point that's not even really a good point. So that's a pretty bad start for this CBC government comedian.
Canadians are connected to the world with the swipe of their finger.
So, Aaron, you're saying we should replace the CBC with Tinder? Could it be that some Conservatives are afraid of the CBC?
Anyway, the whole bit is just so bad. And the reason it's brutal is because, one, he says that Conservatives are afraid of CBC. No, CBC, Conservatives are not afraid of you. Conservatives just loathe you because you're so biased and you're so unethical and you're such liars that you can't even come out and say you're biased. You pretend that you're neutral, but you're really not. And you're just a total waste of taxpayer money. And not only that, but you have a really negative impact on our democracy because you slant the entire perspective and you slant everything towards the left, which is just entirely unethical. So it's not like Conservatives are afraid of the CBC. It's just that the Conservatives understand what the CBC is and understand how wrong it is on so many levels. And then he says, he makes all these unsubstantiated claims about how about how Canadians love the CBC. No, I don't think the Canadians love the CBC. I think that the CBC is a relic of an old time when Canadians didn't have choice, and now we just have so much choice that Canadians choose not to watch, and you can see that from the ratings. So he can talk about how polling says that some Canadians support the CBC. Well, that's not really good enough when we actually have viewership numbers, and they show that people are not tuning in and not watching it. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show.